Hey everyone, it is Thursday, November 21. I'm Rene Ritchie, and right now we're going to be talking about videos in the App Store, we're going to do some iPad mini Redux, and we'll talk about all the week's Apple news. This is the iMore Show. Joining me, as always, we have the managing editor of iMore and Internet Bon Vivant, Peter. I'm going to call you Peter Flarg again. I have to stop doing that. Peter Cohen. How are you, Peter?
Just fine, Rene. Thanks.
I see you on Twitter just so all the time as Flarg, and it messes me over.
It's true. It's true. It's my ubiquitous online identity.
Your nom de guerre? Your nom de tweet?
Exactly.
Also joining us, senior editor of iMore, Richard Devine. How are you, Richard?
Hello, everybody. Good evening.
I never have the desire to call you Ricker666. It just doesn't work the same way in my brain.
Doesn't roll off the tongue quite as well as Flarg.
Also joining us, and I will not call her Ali iMuggle, it is Ali Kazmuha, our awesome how-to and general ninja editor. How are you, Ali?
I'm good.
So I guess we'll start off with the breaking news. Why not? Right before we went to broadcast, Apple's editor's pick of the week went up. It went live in the UK store first, which is interesting, and it is Clumsy Ninja, one of the games that was debuted, I forget how long ago, but it was over a year ago at one of the Apple events, and then it went out Singapore only for a while. And now it's finally going wide. But the interesting thing here is that as part of the editor's choice page, for the first time, there is a video with the app. So you see the little editorial description, you see a screenshot, and then there's a video. Richard's showing it up. Say something, Richard.
There we go. I've just found it now, yeah.
So, Ali, you cover a lot of apps for us. I'm going to ask you this first. I mean, people have been asking for video trailers like they do movie trailers for a long time, and especially with iOS 7 because everything moves so darn much that it would be helpful to better portray the apps. Do you think this is something that Apple's actually going to roll out? Are they going to save it for just editors' picks? Is this a one-off? What's going on here?
I just saw this right before the podcast. So is this something that Apple's actually putting together, or is it something the developer's providing them with?
We don't know.
It looks to me as if it has to be an Apple thing because basically when you... Okay, so I'll try and do it. So that's the UK App Store at the moment. So Clumsy Ninja's the editor's choice. I'll get back. No, don't want that one. Wherever it is. So then, tapping on that, we get this sort of special screen with the video on, but it's not the app listing because you then tap on the app to, you go to the usual listing page as well. So it must be an Apple thing. They must be putting together a special page for these apps.
Well, I'm wondering if it's something they're asking the app developers to put together for them, or if it's an Apple thing. I can't see them doing that for every app.
Let's get Richard up there so we can see him. There we go.
Yeah, it's just playing the... I mean, I don't know if it... I don't know. I might have lock rotation on, but basically it just plays in the video player.
So, do you think, Richard, this would help? Like for a lot of apps, one of the reasons people want this is that they think it will enhance the chance that someone will buy an app. They'll see a demonstration of it, and they'll be more likely to know if they want it or not. Maybe it'll discourage some people, but if people are unsure about it, maybe it'll put them over the edge. Do you really need to see Real Racing 4 to know you want it?
Personally, no, not on that particular one, but it could be good. I mean, Apple obviously picks editor's choice apps that they think are really great apps, so why not show them off? I mean, when I'm looking for apps, obviously not necessarily for stuff that we're going to review, but a video always helps me get a grasp of how well it's, how well it plays, what it looks like. Screenshots do one thing, but obviously it doesn't tell the whole story. So I mean, I've not really watched the video apart from holding it up in front of the webcam, but it shows off the app probably better than just sticking a couple of pictures up there. I quite like it.
Peter, what do you think? Is this something that might also work for the Mac App Store? Especially for games, it'll be fantastic.
Games for sure. I think that we're seeing Apple do some interesting stuff this week. Yesterday they rolled out a new version of the Apple Store app for the iPad, and a lot of people had been wondering why the Apple Store app was just for the iPhone. Well, I think we've got our answer because they didn't just port the Apple Store app to the iPod. They completely reinvented it for the iPad to make it as iPad native an application as they can. There's a lot of gesture support built into it. They use the increased, screen real estate of the iPad to create a much more interactive experience. So you can, scroll through pages of product information and use interactive menus to configure your particular system to order and so on. And I think that's great. I think it's great that they did that, but I also think it shows you that Apple is very serious about sort of moving the whole e-commerce equation on iOS devices in a different direction. So if Apple can refine it and customize it a little bit, even if it's only for their, editor's choice stuff, I think that's a good thing.
I do think it's odd that it debuted in the UK first, because if it was just an international thing, it would have hit Australia and New Zealand first. If it was an everywhere thing, it would be in the US as well. And the page, it doesn't look finished to me, especially on iTunes desktop. There's just sort of a video. There's a line of text. It doesn't wrap very nicely. It's not well laid out yet. So I wonder if we're seeing sort of a preview or an early fire, maybe, Ali, of something that might be more systemic later.
Yeah, I can't see them doing that for everything. I would think that would be an editor's choice thing. Apps that they want to highlight, that would seem like that would be a good option for. We already know how many apps there are in the App Store, so I wouldn't think
a million.
That would make sense. Yeah. But I'd be interested. Richard, did you try on the computer? Did you say that, or is it only showing?
No, I've only looked at it in the app on the iPhone.
Okay.
I did it on the iTunes desktop. I just switched to it's easier for me because I've never logged into iTunes desktop, so I just switched.
So it does show up on there too?
It plays like a trailer for a movie. It takes over the full screen, plays as a full screen iTunes trailer.
Interesting. Yeah, I don't know why they did it in the UK first. Sorry, Richard.
You got the Apple Store
not normal.
iPad, so.
Yeah, Peter was mentioning the new Apple Store app for iPad, and first of all, it's not a universal binary. It's got a totally different user experience. It's using a different, Apple usually uses Helvetica Neue as their system font. This is using Myriad, which is their corporate font, which is interesting. And Peter, it's US only. Now, the iPhone version was US only for 11 months. It debuted, I think, in April of 2010. It went international, and I might be getting the year wrong, in March of 2011, I think. What's your take on this? Is it just hard to do all the different retail builds all at once, and it might roll out eventually, or is this more of an experiment that they're working on?
I think it's probably a little bit of both. I think that they probably wanted to gauge customer reaction to it, and also make sure that whatever back end that they're using, linking to their inventory system is working appropriately. So staging the rollout makes a lot of sense. But also, I mean, their stores are obviously custom tailored based on local currency, based on availability of product, based on what third-party products are being sold. So I imagine it is a fairly significant logistical contortion that Apple has to go through to launch the Apple Store app in each individual country. Just like coordinating the Apple Store online, just in general, internationally, every time it's updated, they'll take it down. And, we always see these news flashes on Twitter and on some of the blogs, saying that the Apple Store is down and, got a message that it'll be coming back later. And when it comes back, everybody kind of scours the Apple Store online to try to figure out what's changed.
iPod socks have been updated. iPod socks have been updated.
Yeah, exactly. Oh, my God. Anyway, my point is that Apple's online store requires a lot of maneuvering, so we shouldn't be surprised that it's a staged rollout. I don't think that we'll be waiting 11 months for international versions of this, though.
It is interesting, though, that it came out right before Black Friday in the U.S. Now, Apple does do Black Friday internationally because, why do something, on different schedules? We can do it all on one schedule. And we don't really have it in Canada. Richard doesn't really have it in the U.K. We have Boxing Day on December 26th. But we're going to get Black Friday sales from Apple. And I think, Ali's holding it up. Let me just get over to you, Ali. There we go. I think maybe Apple might have wanted this out, especially in the U.S. for Black Friday, is my guess.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that would be mine too. I'd kind of prefer. I haven't really messed with the iPad app too much, but it almost seems to me almost like it's a more slimmed down version of their website than it is a takeoff of the iPhone version. I actually kind of like it better.
Haven't seen it yet. Unlike on the iTunes desktop, I can just change countries willy-nilly, but when I try to change countries on either the iPhone or the iPad, I get that thing saying if you change countries, you won't be able to change back for 90 days, and then I can't access iTunes Match, and I can't access my app downloads, and it's untenable. I will not be tend. The other app I really want to talk about, and because we've been doing so much iPad coverage, we haven't talked about it yet, is the all-new iMore app for iOS 7. And we have rebuilt the iMore app that you all know and love. Right now it's iPhone only, but we are working on an iPad version probably in the next couple months. But I will just show it off here. It is completely redesigned for iOS 7. And it's got all the functions that you could possibly want. You can just gesture backwards for the sidebar. You can scroll through all of our featured stories. You can go into a feature. You can actually go into any story. Not yet, Ali. Spoiler. You can pull up the stories. You can go to comments, and we have all the avatars working now. For people who've set their avatars. Around iOS 7 style. What were you saying, Ali? What's in the latest 3.1 update?
Landscape.
Yeah, we didn't have it at launch.
That's something that some of our readers have been asking about too. So if you've been angered by our insistence in portrait mode in the old version of the app, please update. You will get landscape mode finally, and you'll be able to hold all of your iOS devices sideways and be happy.
So the story behind that is that we had landscape mode in one of the early alphas, and it wasn't rendering in the comments properly. It worked everywhere but the comments, and we didn't want to have all the screens, and you'd go to comment, and suddenly you'd be thrown back into portrait. So we disabled it for the first build. Our developer, Neil, who's fantastic, Neil Sainsbury, worked really hard. He managed to fix it for 3.1, so it's in there. You've still got podcast, audio, and video. Just a ton of stuff. Brand new icon designed by the one and only Mark Edwards of Bajango. If you're watching the video, and you really should be watching the video, you can see it there. But if you haven't already, just go to the App Store, search for iMore, download it. We're even doing a contest because we're so happy with the app. If you use the app to leave comments on any of our articles for the rest of November, you will be entered for a chance to win the iOS device of your dreams. Ooh. And it doesn't get any better than that.
I guess staff is probably excluded from that deal, right?
Yeah, I'm sorry, Peter. But if you have children you have not acknowledged, you can have them entered.
I'll send out messages to all of my bastards.
All right, so that brings us very neatly right back to device of your dreams, iPad Mini. Richard and I have had them for a week now. Richard, I just posted my review. My review went live yesterday, and I'll put a link to that in the show notes. I'm incapable of spending less than a week reviewing an iOS device. I thought this would be much faster because it's really just an iPad Air that's smaller, but it turns out I had way more to say about it than I thought I would. So a typical iMore review is up. You've had it for a week now, Richard. What are your thoughts on it? Is it what you expected? Is it different?
I absolutely love it. It's everything I expected and more. As I've mentioned before, the reason I didn't pick up the original Mini was because I didn't really like the display, and when I was using it, when I've tried it out from stores and friends, it just felt a little bit. Compared to an iPad 4, it felt like a cheaper version. It felt like a step down. This, obviously, I've had the iPad Air for a fortnight leading up to getting this, and I can't really tell any difference between them apart from the size, and that's a really good thing, because if I was having to choose between one of them, I could go into a store and know that I was going to get a great experience, whichever one I was picking up. There's been a lot said about the display and the colors, and you know what? I actually kind of like the slightly less vivid look on the iPad Mini. There's a definite difference, but I actually prefer how it looks on this.
How dare you, Richard? How dare you? There are people so angry on the internet right now that the iPad Mini has a narrower color gamut than the iPad Air. How dare you not give proper faith and credence to the wounding of their eyeballs?
They may not like it, but I do. It's just it's a personal thing. I mean, I've done the same as I've sat it side by side with an iPad Air. Yes, there is a difference, and it looks more vivid on the Air. But you know what? I kind of like the slightly more. It's almost like a more pastel-y shade on the on the Mini.
Saturated.
I quite like that. I don't see any problems with any blacks or whites or anything. So, and that's you know, that's the biggest part of it, because a lot of the web content stuff, there's a lot of whites, and Safari's white, and everything else is white. It's fine. I didn't mean anything to me at all.
Yeah. It actually, Allie is going to be the most victimized by this because it is the color of her shirt. It is the reds to magentas that is most affected, and they'll look slightly less saturated. And you know, Peter, in my experience, you know, I have a design background. I've been a photographer for a long time. The human brain is a remarkable error correction thing. That's why spelling is so difficult. If you put an iPad Air next to an iPad Mini, you can easily see the difference. But if you're using an iPad Mini for a while, your brain just resets what its expectation of red is, and it looks fine. I'm guessing, Peter, there's a very small percentage of people that would notice the difference in panel quality between a Mini and an Air or a Retina MacBook Pro or whatever.
You know, I like to think of this as the showroom problem. When you go into like a big box electronics retailer, like a Best Buy, for example, and you take a look at all of the 60-inch LED TVs next to each other, you find that, you know, maybe the low-end brand doesn't really look that nice compared to the high-end brands. The high-end brands, the images will be sharper, the colors will be more saturated, the blacks will be blacker. Maybe the motion, you know, the frame buffering will be improved, and you think, God, you know, I got to spend $3,200 on that set, or I'm going to feel like an ass. You know, I'm just going to be looking at this TV, this low-end TV, and I'm going to feel like I'm living in a ghetto, and it's going to be crap, and I'm going to hate myself, and I'm going to eat a shotgun. But you know, the fact is, you get that cheap TV home, and unless it's a real piece of crap, unless there's something really wrong with it, you're fine with it. You're fine with it. You know, I ran into this last year when we bought a TV for my bedroom. My wife and I decided that we wanted to upgrade our old CRT that was finally dying to a flat panel, and I ended up spending $200 on a cheap Chinese flat panel. And you know, we fired it up in the store, and it looked okay. It didn't really look that great, though. But yeah, we have not had a single problem with it at home. Why? Because it's the only device that we're looking at. And
because Netflix and iTunes compression is worse than your TV set.
Right. So if you're working on an iPad Air and an iPad Mini with Retina display side by side, obviously you're going to notice some differences. You know, and obviously part of it depends on how well trained your eye is, and part of it also depends on the, you know, the specific manufacturing quality of the devices that you're looking at. But going to be some variances. So yeah, on balance, looking at them side by side, it's going to make a difference. But if you're just holding one or the other, you're not going to care. You know, because any way you slice it, the iPad Mini with Retina display is still a remarkably awesome-looking device. Mm-hmm. You know, with this, you know, tiny screen, but infinite cosmic power. It's sort of like the iPad Mini version of Genie from Aladdin. You know, infinite cosmic power, tiny little living space. You know, it's the same thing under the hood as the iPad Air. You know, okay, the clock speed's a little bit different, but it's the same damn thing. It's just as capable. It's just smaller. So yeah,
I never had a friend like Mini.
Exactly. I really don't think that this iPad Mini Retina display image gate issue is going to amount to anything. I don't think it's a real problem for anyone except tech snobs who are comparing them.
Now, you know, I do. I want your opinion on this too, Ali, because you know, I don't want to sound like we're Apple apologists, just saying, oh, you know, it's fine. Apple does have one of the highest density displays now, but it's not as high density as some others. And you know, Amazon has got an incredible, I think it's got an sRGB panel in their things now. When you look at the components, Ali, you know, especially for photographers, would you maybe want to skew towards the Air if that's important to you?
Yeah, I would say for photographers and graphic designers, and again, like Peter said, tech snobs that are going to know the difference. We also need to keep in mind that most people do not own both of these devices. They're going to pick one or the other, unless you're Rene Ritchie or Richard Devine, or you know, one of us that are, or people that are actively reading iMore that really have a place to fit both of those. I know some photographers and some graphic designers that would probably notice color differences on the Mini. But it's like Peter said, it's basically, unless you have them side by side, it's not a huge issue, especially to the general consumer. I had a friend that worked in an electronics store that sold, I think it was Sears, and he said that the manufacturers, literally, they come in and they jack up. If you look at your TV, they have the dynamic settings, and then those are never the settings that you use at home because they
Yeah.
would blind you. But that's what they do on the display shelves. They jack them up as high as they can and hope that their TV is brighter and more colorful than the TV that's going to be sitting next to it. So, and that's what they want. But then, when you get home, you realize, oh, well, I'm never going to have it up that high anyway because it's going to blind me. So I think it's the same thing. You see the difference when they're side by side, but in reality, the specs really are not that different.
So, Peter, my last question for you, and then I want to get Richard's, final impressions on this. Some people keep writing to us and saying, "Why aren't you reporting about the sluggishness on the Mini? It's intolerable." I have done every test I can imagine. I've put both side by side. I've spun them. I've turned them. I've made them do flips, and they perform exactly the same to me in the App Store, rotating exactly the same. No matter what it's doing, it appears. And I'm not saying it's always great. Sometimes you can actually see iOS 7 fracture into its layers and spin them at different times. But that's an iOS 7 problem to me. It is 100 megahertz slower, but I don't see any technical reason why an iPad Mini would be vastly more sluggish than an iPad Air.
Yeah, neither do I. I mean, accepting on face value, Renee, that the plural of anecdote is not data, and that cuts as much for what your experience is as for the people who are saying that the iPad Mini with Retina display is somehow slow or sluggish. We don't know what exactly is causing these issues, whether it's software or hardware related. So the absence of hard data, it's kind of hard to report on anything authoritatively. That's not what we do here at iMore.
We don't test 1,000 of them.
Right.
We would love to, but our wallets would not allow us to.
One each is enough.
So, Richard, I'm really happy with it. The question I've been getting over and over again, the same question as last week, it has not subsided, is which one do I recommend, the iPad Air or the Retina iPad Mini? People are mostly interested in comic books. I didn't realize that the Venn diagram for comic book nerds and gadget nerds intersected quite to the degree. I knew it was large. I didn't know it was so enormous. I read comics exclusively this last week on the Retina iPad Mini. I prefer them on the iPad Air because it's closer to an actual traditional comic book size that I grew up with. But reading on the Retina iPad Mini was fine. I could read every word bubble. I could read the smallest text. I could do it in landscape mode in 2-page spreads. And I found that was the same for everything. There's nothing that I can do on one that I can't do on the other. But when I'm holding the iPad Air, I would like it to be lighter like the iPad Mini. When I'm holding the iPad Mini, I would like it to be bigger like the iPad Air. They really are, what Apple said, mostly different, only in size. And I think, for me at least, it comes down to, if I was traveling most of the time, I would definitely go with the iPad Mini. If I was going to use it outside the house, I could put it in the back pocket of my non-hipster jeans. I could put it in my bag really easily, super light. With a MacBook Air at a coffee shop, I can close that place down now. I can tether them under the table. Fantastic. But if I was using it at home as my home computing device, I would go for the Air just because everything from art to videos to comics is just much bigger on the big screen. What would your go-to? How do you solve this problem?
I've really struggled with that question, and I'm kind of the same as you. I don't read comic books, so I can't use that as anything to buy, any reasons to buy anything. But yeah, I recently, obviously, since getting the Mini, I've probably been using it more just because it's the newest one. But I would say that if you are going to be taking your iPad with you, then consider the Mini, because if for nothing else, you can spend less money and get the same iPad, or you can spend more money and get more storage. So I think the 32 gigabyte one is $399 or something over here, which is the same price as a 16 gig iPad Air. So if you're going to be mobile and you want an iPad, maybe the Mini is going to be the better option. If you're at home, definitely think about getting the Air, because I've laid in bed reading and watching videos, and it's so much more pleasurable to hold and use than the old iPad 4 was. But I would say think about where you're going to use it and how much you want to spend, because if price is an issue, you're now in a position to get basically a proper iPad for less money than you've ever been able to get before. So if you literally only have the $319 or whatever that translates to in US, if you've got enough money for the Mini and for the base Mini, and that's it, go for it. You're not going to be disappointed anymore.
No, I think that's very true. Peter, Ali, any advice for people who are still split down the middle?
I think it really comes down to usage. You really have to think about where you use it most, like Richard said. When I really think about it, sure, I bring my iPad when we travel, but 90% of the time I'm using it at home to relax, to read, and for me, the Air just makes more sense. I like being able to take it to Starbucks and write and just be uninterrupted by things. So for me, I tried the wireless keyboards for the Mini. They're way too cramped. So for something like that, writers, I guess it's really going to depend on whether the accessories you want to are going to work well.
Sorry, Shamir, I'm going to pronounce the name. Shamir Muji in our chat room is saying he's waiting on the 13-inch iPad Pro to read comic books on. I'm guessing that'll have a full-on digitizer so you can draw them too. And one of the things, Peter, that has occurred to me as I've reviewed the Air and I've reviewed the Mini is that a lot of people said, oh, they don't have multi-windows yet. They don't have multi-user yet. And as I reviewed these products, I realized how glad I am that remains true, that Apple is keeping these as post-PC devices. Because I think when you look at a Surface or you look at any Android version from Honeycomb on where they do multi-windowing, it never works right, because when I want that feature, I start thinking of OS X. When I have real, like Unix, multi-window, multi-user, drag and drop from one to the other, automation, all these things that would be absolutely abhorrent to me on a tablet. And I'm kind of glad, just if you do the repercussions, so you have multi-window, well, how do you manage those? Well, how do you drag and drop between them? What does that look like? What's behind the multi-windows? There's so many questions that raise. I'm really happy that Apple has stuck to their model of keeping the Mac, and keeping iOS, because to me, it's like a hammer and a screwdriver. They both have their places, and I don't need no screw hammer in my life.
Yeah, screw hammers are probably not the toaster fridges. They're just not the best solution for a lot of people. People are entitled to want what they want. And Apple's entitled to absolutely ignore that segment of customers. I contend that multiple user profiles are a thing that could make the iPad experience better for certain applications like. Let's say, budget-strapped schools, or people with tight wallets at home that have an iPad that they want to be able to share with other family members, but don't necessarily want all the family members' junk on it.
Well, let me ask you this, because I think that I put this in my review. I think Apple usually solves the problems we have. So if someone says, I want multitasking on iOS, and Apple says, no, you don't. You want to listen to Pandora while you surf the web, so we're going to give you this API. And they do that with a lot of things. They try to figure out the problem and not the solution that people want. Humans, on the other hand, always state solutions. They very rarely tell you what the real problem is. So could you imagine a world, and this is what I was thinking about, where instead of multi-windows, you just have much better push interface, and you have all these things that surface for you when you need them. Or instead of multi-user, you have the idea of iCloud profiles, where your persona is not dependent on the device anymore. And it's not like a Unix sense where the machine is managing multi-profiles, but just where the state of the machine goes with you and not necessarily with the device.
Precisely. I think that that there are elegant ways to solve the problems that people have without giving them what they're asking for, because they're basing their assumptions on how they know technology to work and how they've seen it work before, not
faster
necessarily.
Horses.
Right. Exactly. Not necessarily judging what can be done separately. Not regardless. Like I said, people are entitled to want what they want, and Apple's entitled to ignore them, or, as you point out, offer them solutions to their real problems instead of giving them exactly what they're asking for.
I think that's absolutely true. And I think so. We got iOS 7.0.4. It came out after the new iPads came out. It was bug fixes and FaceTime fixes, and they even pushed out 6.1.5 for the older iPod Touch, so they could get the FaceTime fixes too. We also got iOS 7.1 beta. Ali, it's not beta 1. It's just iOS 7.1 beta. It's under NDA, so we can't talk about the contents. But from everything that's been reported so far, and Apple themselves have not announced any. Like in the old iPod shows, they would announce new features for a 0.1 release. What do you make of that? Do you think Apple, because they started iOS 7 late, they might still be catching up on what was supposed to be the core functionality of iOS 7?
I just want a quick reply. I was really hoping for that in 7. I'm never gonna get it. I've just come to terms with that. I saw no quick reply. I just ignored it. No, seriously. I don't know. I kind of feel like there was a lot in iOS 7 to begin with. I do think it's kind of weird that it just went. There's no announcement, nothing. So that's a little different. But Apple's been a little different in the past couple months with the iPad Mini Retina release, and I think that we can maybe expect it to not be what we've typically come to know from Apple. I have not had a chance to install 7.1 yet or even play with it, but I don't know. I guess I kind of expected something from them with a major point release.
Well, Richard, I mean, in previous years, maybe the iPad event would have had 7.1 announced with the new iPads, and it would have had some feature to go along with them, and we just didn't see that this year.
No, it's almost been swept under the rug. So that asks the question then: is it a traditional major point increase, or is it, like you say, just catching up? I mean, personally, I kind of hope they do something about the transitions on the iPad, because they're still they fixed them on the iPhone somewhat, but they still feel way too slow for me on the iPad. So I'm hoping they go.
Well, I mean, just so to put it in context, around November, about a year ago this month, Apple had a huge change in management. Scott Forstall, who had been in charge of iOS, left, and Craig Federighi, who'd been in charge of the Mac software, became in charge of all software. Johnny Ive was put in charge of design, and Apple radically changed their direction. If not for that, iOS 7 probably would have looked a lot like iOS 6. But they did this whole thing in less time than they expected to do, and they did a lot of changes. And if you remember back at WWDC, iOS Beta 1, iOS 7 Beta 1, was iPhone only, and it was iPhone only for 2 weeks because the iPad version just wasn't ready yet. And some people didn't even think that the iPad version of iOS 7 would ship at the same time as the iPhone version. It did, of course, but it's always felt a little hotter, a little further behind. But I think iOS in general would benefit almost from the snow leopard treatment, where they don't worry so much about user-facing features and they just nail every transition, every overlay, every bit of text. I would, and Peter, Snow Leopard probably better than anyone here, I would be really happy with every once in a while, especially during major transitions, if Apple just took a moment, in Peter Nichols fashion, put their fingers on the bridge of their nose and just fix things.
Absolutely. And anytime you've got a major operating system update, whether it's iOS 7 or Mavericks or what have you, there are problems to contend with. It's millions of lines of code. It's a very complicated code base. Nothing is ever perfect. So 7.1, whatever's going to happen with 7.1 will happen with 7.1. Whatever is going to happen with 10.9.x is going to happen with that too. Apple's just trying to make it the best it can.
I can't wait for Snow Mavericks, or is it Mountain Mavericks? I'm not sure which one.
It's true.
So I wanted to have a little bit of fun with this, and I did a post on features from Mavericks that I'd like to see go into iOS. A long time ago, Apple did their Back to the Mac event, where they said they were taking features from iOS and returning them to the Mac, and back then I did this other sort of a piece on features I want to see from the Mac go to iOS, and now since both of them have been updated, I thought it was time to kind of revisit that. And I want to get your guys' opinions on that. So the first thing on my list is battery shaming. It's one of my favorite features in Mavericks. It's where they have a little tattletale that says, "Oh, look, and Photoshop is using this much power, Final Cut Pro is using this much power," and you can tell who aren't being good corporate citizens, who are impacting your battery life, and
Google
you can choose
Chrome.
to close them. Yeah, Chrome, absolutely. Safari.
It's always Chrome.
Never out of Chrome. Yeah.
I would love to see that on iOS. I would love to see Skype listed. I'd love to see BBM listed. I would love to see the apps, because as much as it helps laptops, and Richard, I don't know if this exists on Android or not already, as much as it helps me on my laptop, it would help me infinitely more to know who is just not being a good mobile app for me.
Yeah, I mean, I haven't actually got an Android phone to hand, but one of in the battery stats, for example, on Android 4.3, well, I don't know about KitKat, but you can it'll tell you how long the display's been on, what percentage of the battery. So you get a little chart that tells you how it shows you how your battery's been decreasing during the day. But then there are lists of certain things underneath that it'll tell you what's been using your battery. So obviously the display is the big one of them. You tap on that, it'll tell you how long your screen's been on, what percentage is used, all that sort of stuff. And I think there's apps and things that can delve even deeper into that, just because it's a little bit more open to that kind of delving into the system stuff. But yeah, it'd be fantastic to see, because I mean, even just thinking of the display at the top level, how much of your battery life in the day is the display actually using? It could be a lot less than we think, or it could be a lot more.
Yeah, any interest in that, Peter? Because again, this is a very new feature for Apple. Previous versions, people running OS X previously would never have surfaced this. They would just think, that's not information we want to give to the user. But since they did it on OS X, maybe it could filter down to iOS.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the battery shaming thing is an awesome feature in Mavericks, and it's actually caused me to stop using software on my laptop that I know is killing my laptop's batteries. Although I'm having some weird issues with my fans never powering down on Mavericks that I never had under Mountain Lion that I still can't quite figure out. Yeah, I mean, there is this philosophy with Apple to not have to worry your pretty little head about what's going on under the hood of iOS 7. So as much as I would like to see some battery shaming stuff come into play, I'm not really sure that that's really keeping with what their intent is, which is really to hide the man behind the curtain and keep users as far away from the operating guts of the machine as possible.
I could see it though, Ali. Like, you double tap home and you go to the multitasking view, and apps that are being battery bastards are just glowing red.
I did something very interesting last week that I've never done before since the feature was available. I turned off the percentage on my battery. And I noticed that I make it through a whole day and my battery doesn't die. So I don't know. I'm split on that. I like it on my laptop because we have apps that actually pull more battery. I don't know. But then again, on the other hand, mobile phone batteries are so tiny. It almost seems like it might be more important to have it there. But I think that people will obsess over it. I obsessed over the percentage meter and, oh God, I have 40%. I need to plug my phone in. So I did that. Apple has tools. Well, Apple has tools that they can see what you're doing and when you're charging. I don't know if any of you have ever been at a Genius Bar where they, can look. They can wirelessly pair your phone with their iPad, and they can see your usage. They can show you, when you plugged in, when it was depleting, what apps were eating. It's kind of creepy. They can see what you spend. So I spend more time on Tweetbot than I do anything else. So they
can also give you a provisioning profile that kind of lets you send them that data if you're having problems remotely.
Yep. So
the NSA has all this stuff anyway.
They do, exactly. But I mean, they have that data, so I don't think it would be hard to make that user accessible. I think if they wanted to do that, they would have done it already.
All right, so my next one is enhanced dictation. So on Mavericks, you can choose to download a 785 megabyte file that will let you do dictation right on your Mac. You no longer have to worry about an internet connection to have the dictation resolved. I would love to see that for Siri. And Richard, for example, the Motorola X, the Moto X has that natural language coprocessor, the context-aware coprocessor, and it does a lot of its voice parsing right on the device. And if right now, Siri can fail to set an alarm because it can't get to the internet, and that's such a local thing. I would like to remove that point of failure.
Absolutely. I don't use Siri very much because, again, if you don't have the internet connection, it just doesn't work. But from what I've seen on the Moto X, it seems to work quite well, having that dedicated hardware and software interaction for the natural language. We don't get the X in this country, so I can't really test it too much, but I mean, Google's done a lot of work in the voice recognition space anyway, and I think given the option to download the file would be fantastic because it's not taking up space if you don't want it. But if you do use Siri a lot and you want to have better dictation, it'd be a fantastic option to have for sure.
I mean, it's also a sizable option though. It's 785 megabytes to download that. So that's a lot of overhead when you're talking about the actual imprint of the operating system on an iOS device. I'm not saying that it's not a good idea, but it is a sacrifice that people would be making.
There are geniuses in your great state. Actually, sorry, you're in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, who are working on this problem for Apple right now.
That is correct. You know, it's interesting. There's the Boston area is a real hub, for lack of a better term, because that's its nickname, the hub. We don't call it Beantown. If you say the word Beantown, we know that you're from out of town, because nobody here actually calls it Beantown. Anyway, of voice recognition technology, and it has been for a large number of years. But yeah, you know, the folks at Nuance and other folks are working on that as we speak. So, you know, we'll see the fruits of their labor further down the road, I'm sure.
Are you sure it's not the Big Chowder? I could have sworn it was the Big Chowder.
No, that's something else you're thinking of.
All right, Ali, the next one that I was thinking about is something that you already mentioned.
And it's pronounced Chowda, by the way.
Chowda. Wicked smart Chowda.
There you go.
Denny Crane. Ali, the thing that you mentioned was actionable. Apple calls them interactive notifications. Google calls them actionable notifications. And the idea is, like Byte SMS in the jailbreak days, my favorite jailbreak tweak of all time, you get a text message, you're playing Candy Crush, you don't have to leave the game, go to the Messages app, reply, you know, double tap, navigate back, which is a nightmare. It just, the notification comes up, you tap it, you can answer right in that notification, go right back to your game. We have it on OS X. I want it so badly on iOS.
I can't believe when they brought Quick Reply to Mavericks, I was seething. Tiny fists of fury when I watched the podcast. I'm like, are you kidding me? Because, I mean, on your computer, it's so easy just to, you know, I have quick gestures set up, so if I drag my mouse into my bottom right-hand corner of the screen, all my windows come up. So for me, it's very quick and fluid to just switch between windows. I can't do that on my phone. So for me, I think it was more important for me to have it on the phone. So I'm still seething. I'm still not very happy about the Quick Reply issue.
Tiny Vader fist. No!
I've been angry for about 4 years.
Richard, you have I remember, you know, WebOS went a long way towards actionable notifications years and years ago. I forget if it was I forget if it was Jelly Bean or the one before. I think it was Jelly Bean that brought them to Android. We need them on iOS.
We do. I've been playing a lot with an Android phone in the last week since getting a new one, and it's horrible how much I actually do miss them when I come back to, you know, pick up my iPhone, and it's just, yeah, we really, really do need them. I don't need it on my laptop. I don't need it on my Mac. I don't speak to people apart from you guys on my Mac. I need it on my phone.
Yep.
Peter, this is one you suggested, calendar travel time, and I actually wasn't aware of this. I wasn't paying attention, and you mentioned this. On the Mac, when you set an appointment, you can ask it to calculate travel time, whether you're walking or driving, and factor that into your appointment. And that also makes way more sense to me on mobile than it does on Mac.
Yep.
Yeah, you know, it's an imperfect technology because it determines your current location to figure that out. So if you're, like if I were making appointments for CES, you know, it wouldn't be able to really effectively calculate the amount of time it takes me to get from the Bellagio to the Mirage or whatever. You know, it's using your current location as sort of its bearing. But having said that, it's a neat feature, and it comes in really handy because I do generally leave from one place that I'm consistently working on my calendar from. So it does really help me manage my my schedule. So yeah, no, I would love to see that, and I'd love to see that feature. As I've said before on a previous iMore podcast, I would love to see that feature get a little more intelligent. For
Peter, can I tell you the truth? It for some reason it believes that I'm at my work address in Miami and always tells me it's going to take a day and a half to get anywhere.
I think this is like that weird offset thing that I see in Safari, where it always thinks that it's 5 hours behind, but it's only on iMore with the timestamps for that. There's just something hexed about mobile nations. we must have pissed off a gypsy at some point or another. Put a curse on us.
The Malakia. Okay, we're not going to go there. No curses. I'm gonna go outside, spin around 3 times, and spit just to make sure there's nothing going on there. There's a couple other things that I wanted before. I still want. I would love the ability to AirPrint to PDF. Like AirPrint is great. Gelfman and Company did a fantastic job putting it together. I would love the ability to hit an AirPrint button, and I don't have a printer. I haven't owned a printer in 5 years, but say generate a PDF from this and let me email it to somebody or let me do something with it. Ali, for productivity, I think that would be awesome.
Yep, I agree.
The other thing that a lot of people wanted is AirDrop. Now, I know what you're saying. You're going to say, no, there is AirDrop on iOS. But the thing about AirDrop on iOS is the team who built it did not build it to be AirDrop. It was a completely different protocol, and then someone who will not be named on this podcast at Apple decided to call it AirDrop, even though it was the name already being used on the Mac for a completely different protocol. So not only did they not make the protocols the same, they decided to name them the same, and that's just tragic because it creates so much confusion and ill will and frustration, needlessly. But now that they have done that, I believe that it is incumbent upon them sometime in the next year to make the AirDrops play nicely together.
They have to. They really do. I use an app that does something very similar. I think it's called InstaShare. There's a Mac version and an iOS version, but you have to go into an app on your iPhone and enable it on your Mac. Whereas AirDrop, you just you just go into it from Gallery or wherever. So there's things that will do it, but it's extra steps to do it, and it'd be better if Apple just come on, just do it for us, please.
So sort of the last big topic I wanted to talk about, and I'll throw this Peter's way first for obvious reasons, is that once again Apple is rumored to be buying the company behind the original Microsoft Kinect technology, and their name just went right out of my head. I don't know if anybody remembers. PrimeSense, exactly, PrimeSense. Now the reports say the deal hasn't gone through. There's a bunch of stuff going on. But Peter, what do you think of this idea? I mean, I know for a long time people have been, talking about the idea of air gestures or a way to, do multi-touch without having to touch something. And Apple has said, we don't believe that people want to touch their screens. And if you have a television or an Apple TV 3.0 product, people aren't going to want to run up to their giant screen TVs and touch those either. So it seems sort of like one of those future technologies that Apple is pretty good at mainstreaming.
What's that company that has the thing that you can stick in front of the Mac now and actually use gestures in space?
I don't remember the name of that either.
Come
on, exactly what you're talking about.
You know what I'm talking about, though, right? Yeah. Okay. So PrimeSense. Before we get too far off track, let's understand here. PrimeSense is the developer of these 3D sensors and what they call natural interaction solutions. That is the basis for Microsoft's Kinect technology. So it's not like Apple is buying Kinect, or we're gonna see Kinects coming out of our Macs all of a sudden. PrimeSense is the developer of this stuff, but Leap Motion, that's it. So there's already this device that exists for the Mac that's made by a completely separate third party called Leap Motion, and I'm sure that these rumors about PrimeSense being bought out by Apple is making them a little bit nervous because this technology essentially works the same way. But if you think about it, it's an interesting alternative to what a lot of people have been saying, which is, why doesn't the Mac have a touch screen? Well, getting back to what we were just talking about a few minutes ago, Renee, Apple often looks at what people are asking for and tries to figure out what exactly they're trying to do, not what they're asking for specifically. I don't really think anybody wants to touch their Mac screen, especially if they're like me and they occasionally like eating buffalo wings in front of their computer, because it screws the screen up really bad when you start getting Frank's hot sauce and chicken grease all over your screen. But I can be as greasy as I want to be and still make gestures in space like Tom Cruise in Minority Report, and that would be cool. If Apple can adapt PrimeSense's technology to an iMac or a MacBook Pro or any other Apple device that's got a built-in screen, that offers a new level of gesture awareness that we haven't seen from Apple products yet. And the possibilities are endless. So would I like to see PrimeSense technology in the Mac? I absolutely would. Would I like to see it in iOS devices? I absolutely would. I think it would be really fascinating to see how Apple would adapt this technology for its products. But until an actual deal is in place, we don't know for sure that Apple has bought them. And even if we do, it's usually a long time after Apple does an acquisition like this before we actually see the fruits of that in Apple's products. It'll be a while before that technology actually gets integrated into anything that Apple is doing.
I agree with you completely. I mean, in one sense, no one has really cracked this. Like, I have an Xbox 360. It's packaged up now because I'm probably going to get an Xbox One or a PlayStation 4. But the Kinect was okay. It didn't work as well as I wanted it to work. And I think that's the case with a lot of early multi-touch systems too. And Apple did a really good job with the first iPhone in making multi-touch a seamless, direct, intimate experience. And I don't think they would launch anything until they could do that. And for example, Richard, like the Galaxies, the Samsung Galaxy S4 had air gestures, and they weren't consistent. They only worked in Samsung applications, and they kind of broke Fitts Law because you had to hover a little bit over them, or you had to swipe, and it just didn't work well enough. Bad job. But the idea of an iSight camera that's smarter to me, the way that Siri is smarter than a normal microphone. If an iSight camera would just, recognize my face or recognize certain basic gestures in a way that enhanced it, sort of like, Siri didn't replace the existing interface, it sort of added to it. If a smart iSight system could enhance it further, I think that'd be interesting.
Definitely, I think we can look at what Microsoft's doing with the new Xbox One as well as a great example of where kind of version 1.0 was the Xbox 360 Kinect, and it was fun for goofing around and waving your arms at the TV and playing games and stuff. But now they're kind of taking Kinect. It's coming shipped with the Xbox One, and while it supposedly works without it, they're integrating those kind of gestures and the control of the thing into the basic use of the console. So they're kind of not. I wouldn't say they're setting the precedent, but they're kind of starting to use it in more sensible ways. More. They want the Xbox One obviously to be in your living room, and they're putting Kinect as a big part of this, and wave your arms around and do whatever. So there's definitely a future in this kind of thing, and like Peter said, I think Apple will try and figure out what people could do with it and what people would want to do with it, rather than just here it is, wave your arms around sort of thing.
Ali, is there any privacy concerns with it? Google is doing a lot of things differently. For example, with Siri, you have to do an express user action. You have to hold down the home button to have Siri listen to you. But with Google now, you can just say, "Okay, Google," now, and it'll listen. It's always listening to you. Microsoft's new Kinect is going to be the same thing, always listening, always watching. Would you be comfortable with, an Apple device or any device that's just always sort of aware, like a pet in your house, or would you want to have to do something to make it work?
Nope. I don't know. That's kind of creepy to me. I don't know. I guess I would really have to look into the implementation. I've never really looked at how Google Now is implemented, I guess, but I know that it is always listening, and that's just creepy to me. It seems like it would be a battery drain. Maybe not. I don't understand how that really
Well, they have
works.
the coprocessors now, so it's almost like the M7 motion coprocessor. It's just using very low power in the background, waiting for you to say something.
I don't know about that.
I would still walk around my house in a snowsuit, with some sort of muffle over my mouth. Just.
If Microsoft wants to watch me eat pizza, then good luck to them.
Don't you walk around in a snowsuit in your house anyway? I mean, you live in Canada.
I have a dogless sled, thank you. We're okay. Progressive here in Canada. All right, so last thing, Ali, any apps you were looking at this week that particularly interested you? Anything you recommend?
I actually just posted something a little bit ago on an app called Tag Journal. It's been a while since I've seen a journal/diary app come through that has really impressed me, and that one I really liked it. It has markdown support. It's separated very nicely, so you can make notes when you don't want to make an entry, add things to timeline. It's just a beautiful app. It's compatible with iPhone and iPad. If that's your thing, I would suggest looking at it.
Peter, what are you playing these days?
Tiny Death Star. Playing a lot of Tiny Death Star on the iPhone, or actually on the iPad. Little disappointed that it doesn't sync games through Game Center, though, which the first time I fired it up on my iPhone and found that I wasn't continuing the game I'd started on my iPad, I immediately deleted it. Having said that, it's a lot of fun.
And Richard, what about you?
I'm actually this week playing around with Camera 360, so it's not a particularly new app, but I have one of those little Sony camera puck things that clips onto the iPhone, and they've just added support for that with their app. So I've been playing around with that, and I'll write something up about it when I'm done.
I was watching, friend of the show, Guy English, talk about playing the last mission of XCOM Enemy Unknown, which he seems to love, but he said it was in total blackout darkness, which reminded me of that SEAL Team 6 movie that was out last year, where they're just in night vision all the time and you can't see anything. And I just want to beg game producers, the darkness scares some of us. Some of us find the darkness very scary. So if you can give us a little bit of heads up and a little bit of light. Ali, what did you think of Hatch? Hatch just launched from Phil Ryu and Impending and Real Mac Software.
It's a very interesting game. It is, but it's a lot more advanced than Tamagotchi. It's also a lot more needy than Tamagotchi, if that's possible. I like it. I really like the fact that it's pretty much all hand-drawn, so everything's different. I did have a friend text me the other day that was saying, "Is my pet spamming you with gifts? Because yours has sent mine like 6," and I don't know. So that might be a little bit of a problem. I turned off notifications because I keep getting a bunch. But the game itself is very cool. I like the gameplay. I like the idea. It's definitely a cute game. Not something I personally would probably get too attached to. I guarantee you within 3 days my little Fugu will run away because I'll forget about it. But I think there's a niche for that. I think it'll be a pretty popular game.
Yeah, and artwork by David Lanham from the Icon Factory is hard to go wrong.
Yeah.
All right. We're done. Peter Cohen, sir, where can people find out more about you and read your... Oh, before we go, you've been doing a fantastic job this week. You've been putting up the Mac version of our buyer's guides, and you have how to pick the perfect Mac laptop and how to pick the perfect Mac desktop.
Thank you. Yes, it's a lot of information, but if you are trying to decide what desktop Mac you're going to invest in or which laptop machine might be better for you, read through. I've got some advice and I've got a breakdown on what makes them unique. And there's more to come too, so stay tuned.
Yeah, we've got the iPhone buyer's guide, the iPad buyer's guide, the Mac buyer's guide. We're going to make those really easy for you to find over Black Friday in case you want to take advantage of the deals. And we have a fantastic, Derek Kessler did a fantastic job putting together the Mobile Nations Black Friday circular that's linked to right on the top of the site. And lastly, Simon Sage just put up a new version of Best Free Games for the iPad. So if you've got one of the new iPads, if you've already had an iPad for a while, you want some great time wasters, some great fun, some great de-stressors, it's right on the front page of iMore right now, best-free-iPad games, and I'll put a link in the show notes. Back to Peter. Where can we find you?
Let's see, on iMore, of course, occasionally on the Loop at loopinsight.com, and on the Tweety face at Flarg, Flargh.
Richard Devine?
On imore.com every day, and frequenting the Twitters at Ricka666.
Nice. Ali?
imore.com every day, and imuggle on Twitter. I'm also on the Google Plus, not that often, and I think that's about it.
You can find me at Rene Ritchie on all the social things. In addition to iMore, you can find all of our shows, which is Debug for developers, Iterate for designers, Vector for media and analysis. You can get all of those at mobilenations.com. This week on Iterate, we have the Real Mac guys. Next week, we're going to have Paul Haddad of Tapbots talking about the new Tweetbot. We have a special coming up later tonight on Debug where we have John Siracusa of Ars Technica and the Accidental Podcast fame, with Ryan Nielsen, who used to be a project manager for OS 10 at Apple, and Daniel Jalkut from Red Sweater Software and Mars Edit fame, all talking about the future of OS 10 with Guy English. You don't want to miss that. Everybody, thank you for joining us. Chat room, thank you for joining us. Peter, Ali, Richard, thank you for being here.
Thanks, Rene.
Thank you.
See you next week.
Bye.
and the quarterback is toast.